Just when you think you've got a handle on how the President of the United States gets from A to B, well, the unexpected happens. Imagine Air Force One, potentially as a temporary loaner. Okay, let's unpack this.
It's quite something.
We're taking a deep dive into the very real possibility of a Boeing 747-8 from Qatar stepping in as Air Force One, at least for a while. This whole situation has really popped up because the program to build the new VC25B aircraft is facing some, well, pretty significant headwinds.
And what's fascinating right off the bat is this convergence of events making this even a conversation.
Right.
We're seeing substantial delays in a crucial defense project, intersecting with some very interesting international dynamics. And it all brings up some fundamental questions about logistics, optics, presidential travel.
Exactly. And look, this isn't just speculation. We've got a solid stack of information here. News articles from places like Breaking Defense, Newsweek, The War Zone, Al Jazeera, Fox News, Spectrum News, NDTV, even discussions on Reddit, PBS, Forbes.
A broad range of sources.
Definitely. So our mission in this deep dive is to really understand the nuts and bolts, the implications, and frankly, the unusual circumstances surrounding this potential interim solution. So where do we even start? The delays with the Boeing program seem like the natural first step. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Qatari possibility really only comes into focus when you understand the significant challenges facing the VC25B program. Originally, these new Air Force One jets were slated for delivery this year, 2025.
This year?
Yeah. Now, the latest estimates are pushing that back potentially as far as 2029.
Wow.
That kind of delay in a program of this importance is noteworthy in itself.
2029. That's a considerable wait. And in the meantime, the two VC-25As, which are our current Air Force One aircraft, they're getting on in years.
They really are.
As the War Zone pointed out, these are based on the older Boeing 747-200 model, which is becoming increasingly rare. Think about trying to find parts for a classic car. It gets harder and more expensive. That's kind of the situation.
Precisely. And the VC-25B program isn't just about waiting for new planes built from scratch. It's important to understand, Boeing is actually modifying existing, previously owned Boeing 747-8I airliners.
Right. Secondhand.
Yes. And this conversion process has hit a number of obstacles, things like sourcing necessary components. Apparently, some original manufacturers aren't even in business anymore.
Oh, wow.
And also adapting to evolving requirements to address potential future security threats. It's a complex undertaking.
Sounds like a real logistical puzzle. And Breaking Defense reported Boeing has already absorbed over $2 billion in losses on this fixed-price contract.
$2 billion. That's a huge financial hit.
Yeah. And it's not an isolated incident for Boeing, is it?
Apparently not.
They also mentioned delays with the KC-46 refueling tanker's vision system fix, now pushed to maybe 2027, and a significant cost increase in the B-52 radar modernization program that triggered a Nunn-McCurdy Act notification. That term might not be familiar to everyone. What does that signify, sort of in plain terms?
Yeah, a Nunn-McCurdy breach, it's essentially a formal warning signal in the DoD acquisition process. It gets triggered when a major defense program's costs blow way past original projections. We're talking substantial breaches.
Okay.
It indicates the program is facing serious financial or technical trouble and needs high-level review, maybe even restructuring. So for Boeing, having this happen on another major program alongside the Air Force One delays, it suggests broader challenges in their defense contracting work.
Okay, so with those significant delays at the backdrop, we now have this rather unusual proposition from Qatar. What exactly is this aircraft they're offering?
Well, what's fascinating here is the kind of aircraft. It's a Boeing 747-8, often described in sources like NDTV and Al Jazeera as a flying palace.
A flying palace.
Yeah, these descriptions highlight its extremely luxurious interior. Apparently includes private bedrooms, elaborate bathrooms, maybe even a grand staircase.
Oh.
Its estimated value is around $400 million, so an incredibly high-value asset.
It definitely conjures up an image that's a bit different from the standard idea of a government plane.
Just a bit.
And the proposed arrangement involves Qatar's royal family, specifically their Ministry of Defense, offering this jet to the Pentagon for temporary use as Air Force One during President Trump's current term.
That's the core of the proposal as reported.
But beyond the luxury, are there any, inherent advantages or disadvantages to acquiring a plane designed for personal use like that?
That's a crucial question. An advantage could be, well, the immediate availability of a large, long-range aircraft,
Right.
potentially filling the gap.
Right.
But a huge disadvantage is that it lacks the specialized security and communication systems that are integral to Air Force One. And these aren't just bolt-on features, they're deeply embedded, requiring extensive retrofitting.
Okay.
Plus, an aircraft designed for personal comfort might not have the same level of, say, redundancy and hardened systems you'd find in a purpose-built presidential transport.
That makes sense. And what's particularly interesting, and has generated a lot of discussion, is the plan for this aircraft after its potential temporary use.
Exactly. The intended transfer of this aircraft to the Donald J. Trump Presidential Library upon his departure from office, that's a key part of the arrangement that's been reported. And this raises the possibility, as Newsweek and others noted, of the former president potentially continuing to use the aircraft privately.
Right, and President Trump himself took to Truth Social to confirm the offer. He called it a gift free of charge that would be helpful. Helps us out, I think was the phrase.
He did.
However, it seems Qatar's official statements present a slightly different picture, don't they?
They do. Qatar, through its media representatives, clarified that it's a possible transfer for temporary use that is under consideration.
Okay.
They explicitly stated it's not a gift in the traditional sense, and that no final decision has been made. This distinction is important. The narrative isn't entirely unified.
It's a bit of a difference in perspective there. We also know from various reports that President Trump toured this aircraft back in February down at Palm Beach International Airport.
That's right. The tour happened.
And there was even speculation the gift might be announced during his trip to the Middle East in May 2025, which, as we now know, didn't happen when he arrived in Qatar.
Right. That announcement didn't materialize on the trip.
And that lack of a formal announcement suggests the practicalities might be, well, more complex than initially presented.
Precisely. I mean, a verbal offer is one thing. Navigating the legal, logistical complexities of transferring and utilizing an aircraft like this for presidential travel is quite another. The fact an announcement didn't occur during a high-profile visit suggests there are likely significant hurdles still being worked through, or maybe being hit.
Which brings us right to the nuts and bolts.
Oh.
The feasibility and logistics of actually making this work. Taking a high-end private jet and turning it into Air Force One. Can't be simple, right?
Not at all. Not even close. The primary challenge is the extensive modifications needed to bring the Qatari jet up to Air Force One's security and communication standards.
Right.
As Forbes reported, an unnamed Defense Department official suggested that securing a contract and completing these mods would take years, not months.
Years, not months.
Years! That time frame alone raises serious questions about its viability as an interim solution.
Yeah, that really changes the calculus of this being a quick fix, doesn't it?
Completely.
And even after those modifications, Spectrum News pointed out the Qatari plane might still have limitations compared to the existing VC25As and the future VC25Bs. Notably, the absence of air-to-air refueling capability. So what does that actually mean in practical terms for presidential travel?
Well, it essentially limits the unrefueled range and endurance. The current Air Force One can stay airborne almost indefinitely with in-flight refueling. Absolutely crucial in various scenarios, especially emergencies or international crises where landing options might be limited or time-sensitive. This Qatari jet, lacking that capability, just wouldn't have the same operational flexibility.
Okay.
And, as the war zone highlighted, relying on a potentially less capable interim jet would mean a significant overhaul of established protocols. For the White House, Secret Service, Air Force, they'd basically have to adapt their procedures.
So logistically, it sounds like a major undertaking with potential drawbacks. Now let's shift a bit. What are the legal and ethical side? Accepting such a valuable asset from a foreign state, that must raise flags.
It absolutely does. This is where the U.S. Constitution comes into play, specifically the Emoluments Clause.
Okay, remind us what that is.
Sure. It basically prohibits federal office holders, including the president, from accepting gifts, payments, or titles from foreign states without the consent of Congress. The idea is to prevent foreign influence.
Got it. And critics have certainly picked up on this.
Oh, yes. You saw figures like Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer voicing strong objections, calling the arrangement unethical, potential bribery, undue foreign influence. I think his quote was something like, "Nothing says America first like Air Force One, brought to you by Qatar." Pretty pointed.
Definitely sharp criticism there.
Yeah.
How did the administration respond to these kinds of concerns?
Well, President Trump and White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt emphasized transparency. They argued that accepting foreign government gifts is legal and has precedent, provided it's disclosed properly.
Okay.
Reports also surfaced, I believe, in Newsweek, suggesting that White House lawyers and the Department of Justice had advised the administration that the deal, structured correctly, could be legal.
And how is it being structured, supposedly, to make it legal?
The argument seems to be that by funneling the jet through the Department of Defense first as a transfer for government use and then potentially to the presidential library later, it might navigate around the direct gift to the office holder prohibition of the emoluments clause.
Sort of two-step process.
Exactly. Though critics would argue that's just a way to circumvent the spirit, if not the letter, of the clause.
Right. And it wasn't just politicians raising concerns. You mentioned Reddit earlier.
Yeah, looking at some public forums like Reddit threads discussing this, you saw really strong reactions. A lot of concern about potential corruption, obviously.
Like what, specifically?
Things like, is this a backdoor way for Qatar to gain influence? Users throwing around terms like Trojan horse, calling it blatant corruption, questioning the whole setup.
Okay. And security implications beyond just the legal side, accepting a plane from another country.
Huge security implications. That's tied into the retrofitting we discussed, but it's deeper. The primary worry is espionage. Could the aircraft contain hidden surveillance technology? Could it be bugged?
That's the nightmare scenario.
Absolutely. And on those same Reddit threads, people were bringing this up constantly, saying you'd need incredibly thorough security checks, maybe even stripping the plane down entirely to its frame to be sure.
A massive job.
Unbelievably complex and time-consuming. And even then, as Spectrum News noted, beyond bugs, there's the survivability issue. The current Air Force One has specific military-grade features, radiation shielding, advanced anti-missile systems.
The stuff you don't find on a luxury jet.
Exactly. And retrofitting those capabilities onto a commercial airframe. It's not clear you could ever achieve the same level of protection as the purpose-built VC25s.
So you've got logistical hurdles, legal questions, security fears. Politically, as you mentioned with Schumer, it sounds like it became quite divisive.
Oh, definitely. Unsurprisingly, the reactions largely split along familiar lines. You had Democrats raising these ethical and constitutional objections, focusing on the emoluments clause and foreign influence. And then President Trump and his supporters defending the offer, framing it as a helpful, transparent transaction, a practical solution to the Boeing delays. Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, really pushed the transparency angle.
So two very different interpretations of the same situation.
Very much so. It's a really multifaceted situation with just a lot of different angles to consider.
Indeed. When you step back and look at the whole picture, this potential Qatari 747-8 deal is much more than just swapping planes.
Oh, much more. It's tangled up with defense program management failures, complex international relations, serious logistical challenges, constitutional questions, and deep security considerations.
Absolutely. So as we bring this deep dive toward a close, it feels like there were still quite a few key questions just hanging in the air.
Definitely.
Will those practical challenges of retrofitting this aircraft even be overcome in a reasonable time frame? Is years, not months, acceptable for an interim solution?
And what level of security and capability can realistically be achieved, even if they do the refit? Will it truly meet the standard?
And ultimately, what does this whole episode say about the current state of presidential travel and the complexities of maintaining such a critical symbolic function?
Which leads, I think, to a final thought for you, the listener. Considering all these intricacies, the delays, the offer, the controversies, does this perhaps highlight a broader need to re-examine how we approach the acquisition and the long-term maintenance of Air Force One itself? And what does the very fact that this kind of unusual interim solution is even on the table tell us about the interception of global politics, pressing domestic needs, and the enduring symbol that is the presidential aircraft? It certainly gives you plenty to think about.